Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Dr. Pronab Sen, the former Chief Statistician of India, a former Secretary of the Ministry of Program and Implementation, which makes you, Dr. Sen, the first UPA bureaucrat to be appointed by the Modi government. But we'll talk about that. The Modi government has just appointed Dr. Sen to head a committee to look at the data, which has been criticized over the last year or so about its integrity. Dr. Sen, welcome to ThePrint. This committee that you're chairing now, which is looking into the data, now you've had one meeting. So what is this committee about, and what is it that you are going to do?
The committee is about actually developing the data collection systems. Our statistical system has had a history that for any particular data set, they always set up a working group or an expert committee, which goes into the details of that data set, right from the definitions all the way down to the final tabulation. Now, what this is a superset of that, because what would happen earlier is that these committees would not be speaking with each other. I mean, they would all be in silos. So this is it's like a superset. And the way we've decided to work is we've broken ourselves up into subcommittees. So the subcommittees will actually look at individual data sets, but every quarter we will get together and discuss the commonalities or the places where things are falling between the cracks.
But what about the data that's already gone before?
Look, as far as the data is concerned, I think there is a misapprehension. There's nothing wrong with the data that exists. The criticism is not about the data per se. The criticism is the fact that the data has been suppressed in a lot of instances.
Do you agree with that?
The data has been suppressed. The data has been demonized on not very good statistical grounds. So what has ended up happening is that there has been a fair amount of demoralization of the statistical professionals in the country. That's a serious problem. I mean, these guys are professionals. They're doing their job well. And they were the pride of the country. I mean, our international reputation was extremely high.
Was, you say was?
Was. Because now what has happened is when the government, of whom all of us are a part, criticizes its own data, it really reflects very badly on the overall state of things.
Right.
Now, that is not particularly desirable.
So can I ask you, you said just now that the data has been suppressed, or there have been allegations that the data was suppressed and it has been demonized. Do you agree with that?
Yes, the data has been suppressed, and if it hadn't been for leaks, fortunately the system continues to leak. A lot of the data fortunately, and the data got leaked, and after the leak happened, the government actually released the data.
So they did release the GDP data.
They released a whole series of data. There's only one data point that they haven't released, which is the last consumer survey.
Right.
Right. That one they haven't released.
Yes.
But all the other ones, whether we are talking about the employment data, or we are talking about the Mudra, the survey that had taken place on how effective the Mudra scheme was in creating jobs. So these were all leaked sequentially. And the government actually came out with
This is over the last year.
This is over the last year. All of this began at the end of 2018. So it's just over
because
a year.
Because in January of 2019, exactly a year ago, that was when there were all these apprehensions about the data on labor, for example, that unemployment was going up.
That is correct.
And jobs were falling off the map.
That's right.
So
that was when the chairman of the National Statistical Commission and another member resigned.
So what happened that time?
That was the suppression. So here were there actually two sets of issues. One was the GDP one, as the other one was the employment one. These were supposed to be seen and vetted by the NSC. The GDP one was not even put up to them. The employment one was put up to them. They approved it for release, and then the normal procedure is within a week of that approval, the report gets released.
Sure.
It didn't happen. They talked about it. They kept saying
why
what's
do you think
happening.
it didn't happen?
Because the news was bad.
How bad was it?
Well, our overall unemployment rate usually stays in the 2.5% to 3% range. It was double that. It was more than 6%.
And this is in the formal economy we're talking.
No, this is in the overall economy, formal plus informal.
Right. So you would say about 6 to 7% was the real unemployment rate.
The real unemployment rate, with youth unemployment practically close to 20%.
And this is a year ago, the data that came out.
The data was for 17-18.
Okay. So 1 year later, do you think things have changed a bit? Have they become better? Have they gotten worse?
We don't know, because the second labor report, so this was the first one
in
the
January
new series.
2019, yeah.
The second one was due 2 months ago.
Yes.
It hasn't been released yet.
Okay. Have you asked the government for it?
Everybody's been asking the government, but it hasn't been released. We don't know what its status is. And this is an annual survey. It's happening regularly every year, on a quarterly basis in urban areas. And the whole idea was that, we needed employment data to make good policies.
Sure.
It is a very important data point, and we need high frequency data, so that's what we are doing. The problem is we haven't got the second year's data set, which is the 18-19 data.
But is the data, does it exist?
Of course it exists.
Where is it?
We don't know.
So would it be under the Ministry of Statistics and Implementation?
Yes, of course.
That's where it would be.
Yeah, that's where it is.
So have you asked for it? Because now that you're heading this committee...
Not yet. As I said, the committee was just formed.
Sure.
And we just met.
But you do intend to ask for it?
Well, the questions will have to be asked, because there is a subcommittee that is going into the employment statistics. So I'm sure they will ask the appropriate questions.
So why do you think the government is suppressing this data?
I have no idea.
I'm sure you have some idea.
No, I mean, because we don't know what the results are. I mean, is it that the results are so bad that the government feels that there'd be loss of face? I really don't know. And we won't be able to tell until we see the data.
Now, Dr. Sen, in January last year, when this data was not released, the labor data, that was subsequently released. Right?
It was leaked and then released.
And when was this?
This was, I think, around March or April, somewhere around there.
Okay, so before the elections. It was released before the elections.
No, the leak happened before the election, but the data was released after the election.
Okay. And are you concerned with the data that was released after the election, and did it reflect what was happening on the ground?
Well, I mean, let's elections are special. Elections are occasions when parties use data points to play down or run down the other side.
Sure.
And doubling of the unemployment rate would have come as a godsend to the opposition.
Right.
I mean, they could go to town with it. So, one understands that sensitivity.
Sure. You understand the sensitivity of not releasing the data before the election?
Before the election. But
you do understand that?
I do understand that. But when you're talking about data which is supposed to be coming out on a quarterly basis and it doesn't come out, then you start worrying a little bit more. Because then it's going beyond just elections.
So which data?
As I said, there's one more report that is 18-19 data hasn't been released yet.
On labor?
On labor.
And what about on the consumer data? The
consumer data
consumption as well as spending?
Hasn't been released at all.
Hasn't been released at all?
No.
So you're concerned about that as well?
Well, I am concerned to the extent that whatever the data says, and we know some of what that data says, because again, not the entire report, but a part of the report was leaked. So we have some ideas to what's going on, and that is actually pretty serious news, because what it's suggesting is that absolute consumption in the country has fallen, including food consumption.
What does that mean?
Which means that people today, well, in 17-18, were able to buy less food than they were in 11-12, which is a serious comment in a country which in any case is suffering from food deficit in a very large segment of our population.
So when you say you're able to buy less food, does that mean that you have less money in your hands to buy that less food?
Presumably, because this is coming from what the households are buying.
And this is across the country. Are you differentiating between
this
rural and urban?
This is a national problem.
And if you look at it more sort of in a more granular way, is rural better than urban, or is urban better?
Again, I think they were roughly the same. Both were negative. One was -1 and the other was -3.
So is India becoming poorer then?
At one level, no. At another level, yes. Overall, I think incomes are going up. But what is happening, I believe, and I think what the data is trying to suggest, is that income distributions are getting worse, which means that the rich are getting richer and the poor are actually getting poorer.
So if we say, so poverty levels, and we're not right now talking about who is a poor person and how many rupees a day you must earn to be qualified as poor. So the poverty index, we're not even going into that. But assuming that if you look at the World Bank figures, and the Prime Minister has said quite often that India has jumped and improved its standing. Would you agree with that?
Well, it had jumped between 2004-05 and 2011-12. After that, the only data that we have is the one that we don't have, as it were, which is the 17-18 data.
But that's 7 years.
It's 6 years?
6 years.
Yeah. Now, the point is that if the leaked data is anything to go by, then what it suggests is poverty has gone up, not down.
So what would be the poverty figures today?
Probably 5 to 6 percentage points higher than what it was in 11-12.
So that would be about, in what region would it be?
Well, that depends on, again, which poverty line you use.
Yeah.
But it would be about, whichever poverty line you use, it will be 5 to 6%.
So say about 25 to 30%?
Well, that depends. It could be, it had gone down to 13%, it could be 18%, 18, 19%. Or if you use the other figure, which would be around, it used to be about 24, 25, it would be closer to 30.
So how would you describe the state of the economy today? Would you say that it's in a slowdown, or would you say it's in a recession?
Well, again, you really need to think about the Indian economy in terms of the, old India and Bharat stories. Bharat is essentially agriculture and the unorganized sector. And India is what we live in, which is the organized corporate.
Right.
Bharat has been hurting for a long time.
Even before the Modi years?
It started in 13-14 and then just continued to go downhill after that. So farmers' distress is real, it is genuine, it is not something one can brush under the carpet.
So 13-14 is again, and I'm sorry to intervene and sort of say, but 13-14 is when you have the election and Prime Minister Modi comes to power. Yeah. So all the figures that you've said so far indicates that it's about between 11 and 13 that things begin to go down.
Well, you see, 12-13 was bad as for the country as a whole. You had all sorts of things. It was the year when all these UPA scams broke out.
Sure.
All decision making stopped.
Right.
Then you had the international economy going through the taper tantrums, and so things went. 13-14, things start to recover for the rest of the economy, but that's the time when agriculture starts turning down. Huh. Okay, and then you start getting this, Bharat and India moving in two directions. Okay. And that's India growing very strongly, Bharat not doing very well. And that becomes even worse after demonetisation. Bharat really take tanks.
And then that's November 2016.
2016.
So are you saying that demonetisation is the source of the evil?
Well, it's a contributory factor, and a large contributory factor. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the source.
What is the source?
I think
there are many sources.
I think there are many sources. I don't think there is enough appreciation of the role that the informal sector plays in India in terms of employment, in terms of incomes, in terms of livelihoods.
So explain that a bit. What happened with demonetisation?
Remember, any production ultimately requires there to be transaction. Goods have to be bought and sold.
Sure.
You can produce, but if you can't sell it, it's no use. What demonetization did, it just took away the medium of transaction. Now, had this been something that lasted for a short period, it may not have been so bad.
When you say medium of transaction, you mean the cash that was used to buy and sell?
The entire agricultural economy is a cash economy. The entire informal sector is a cash economy. That's how transactions happen. They don't use credit cards or checks. Now, in a situation of this kind, when you take cash away, even if there is production, and there was production, mind you, there are no buyers.
Right.
Now, if you don't have buyers, and remember we're talking about agriculture, these are perishables. The production might as well not have happened because bulk of it is going into wastage.
Okay.
If you're not being able to sell. So that just made things worse. And unfortunately, the remonetization process took a long time. It went over at least 2 agricultural cycles.
Right.
And so that was a hammer blow to rural India.
But it's been 3 years now.
So what? The point is that once the damage has been done, remember, this is an ecosystem. Now, if in the ecosystem major parts get damaged badly, it doesn't rebound in a day.
How long does it take?
We don't know. This is the first time it's happened.
Even so, you have experience, Dr. Sen. You must know. You must know something.
We don't, because something as dramatic as demonetization, we have absolutely no history in it. And this kind of disruption that had happened is practically unprecedented. We've had crop failures. Monsoon failures are common. Right? That we know. We know how to react to that. So, we have all kinds of, drought relief programs that the government does on a regular basis. So systems are in place to handle that. Okay, there are systems in place to handle, for instance, default of bank loans. So, loan waiver is only one of the methods.
Sure.
In the banking laws, it's built in that if the government declares a particular area to be natural disaster affected, bank loans in that area are not repayable for a year. Right? What happened during demonetization? None of those systems were in place, which protected the rural India. And the net result, of course, is bank defaults happened. People were not being able to sell their products, and therefore there were no incomes. So there's a whole chain of things that occurred. So it then goes from agriculture, spills onto the informal sector, because the informal sector sells a large amount to the agricultural sector. So it then becomes a chain. And rebuilding that damage takes a while.
So would you say that this drop in food demand, or the demand for food, coincides with demonetization?
Well, as it happens, because 17-18 is the year in which the survey was done, which is precisely the year when demonetization was playing itself out.
So it does coincide?
It does tend to coincide.
I was looking at your blog called Ideas for India, and you say in this, we are currently experiencing some slowdown in growth and not a recession.
One is a continuation of the other. So you start a process of slowdown, and if it continues, you can go into a recession.
So are we in a recession?
Not yet.
Are we moving towards a recession?
We don't know. The point is we're in a slowdown. So if
how slow is this slowdown?
Well, at the moment, I would guess we are working at somewhere around 4% growth.
4% today. And when
it becomes a recession, when it goes into negative territory.
Okay. So if you still do things, if the Modi government still does things in the coming budget,
that's right,
which is a few weeks from now, you could pull things back. What should he do?
Well, the main thing is that at the moment you're looking at a process of slowing down. First, we have to recognize that.
Right.
That this is not something that's going to be self-correcting. That process is continuing, and it is continuing downwards.
Right.
Now, once you recognize that, then the government has to step in to reverse it. And it has to step in a reasonably big way. Small tinkering at the margin doesn't work.
What does that mean? How big?
So, fairly large. Now, the thing is that there is a lot of talk about allowing the fiscal deficit to slip. I think that talk is right. The question, of course, is how much. Are we talking about, 0.5% of GDP, or are we talking about something larger? My sense is that something like 0.5% of GDP is not going to be enough to reverse the process. It may stop it for the moment, but reversing.
So can you explain this simply, if you can tell us what this means, this 0.5 to 1%, if you allow the fiscal deficit
So basically what happens is the government spends more, which means it puts money in the hands of people who then spend it. So then you have a chain that happens after that.
Sure.
So the government pays me money, I buy something from you, you get the money, then you buy something from him, and so on. Now, that chain, so you're giving rise to a whole series of income generation steps. How much income generation you need to reverse it is really the issue. So you've got at the moment a downward trend that is happening.
So how much is the deficit today?
Well, the reported deficit is about 3.5%, a little under 3.5%. The actual deficit is probably higher, but we don't know how much higher it is.
So if you let it slip by, say, another 0.5 to 1%, do you think?
At least 1%, I think, would be needed, in my opinion.
Okay, and so that would do what?
What it would do is that it would start putting more money. So if you put, let's say, 1% into the hands of people.
How do you do that? Do you cut taxes?
No, this would have to be through expenditures.
So you do sort of large outlays, you build things.
You build things,
roads, highways.
You get money
schools.
out there, into hands of people. So you do all sorts of things, roads, highways, expand NREGS, start paying out PM Kisan.
But it seems that the government doesn't have that kind of money.
You don't have that kind of money if you stick to the current fiscal deficit target. You don't.
But
that's why you have to let it go.
So if you let it slip, if you let it go by 1%, then you do have that kind of money.
And the potential is
what do you mean? You have to print notes?
Yes, most probably you will have to print notes, yes.
So then inflation will go up?
That is less of a worry at the moment.
Okay.
Look, if I don't have money to buy food, whether the price is 10 rupees or 2 rupees makes no difference. If I have the money, I may be able to buy it at 10 rupees as well. So the question is, how do you get incomes back? Because remember, we are talking about the poor.
Yeah.
India is not doing that badly. It is now starting to do badly. The recession that people are talking about is not about what was happening to Bharat. That's been around for a while, and we haven't talked about it.
The last 5-6 years at least, or longer?
At least the last 4 years, 3 years. What you're seeing now is India starting to decelerate. Now it's starting to hit closer to home for people like you and me. That's when we're sitting up and taking notice. That's why we're having this discussion. Frankly, this discussion should have happened 3 years ago.
Right.
When the problem was serious enough.
So you put money into the hands of people, into the hands of the poor.
In particular.
By investing in
things like local structures. As you said, schools, rural works of various kinds, rural roads and small irrigation projects.
So are you worried, because we hear a lot about this, that the government is broke and it doesn't have the money? So are you worried about that?
A government cannot be broke. The government of a country cannot be broke. It has the power to print money. What can be broke are the other institutions that comprise the country. State governments can be broke. They don't have the power to print money.
Sure.
All right. The PSUs can be broke. Private corporates can be broke. Little entrepreneurs can be broke.
But the government can't be broke.
Government can never be broke.
So, Dr. Sen, give me, or if Prime Minister Modi is watching, and I hope he is, give him 5 things that he should do when the budget is announced.
Well, number one, as I said, recognize the true deficit. Because we can't take a call as to how much the deficit should be loosened until and unless we know what the deficit actually is today.
Okay.
The numbers that are being projected are not reflective of the true deficit.
Is that part of your job today? When as you head this committee is to ask for the real data, the real figures?
These are budgetary numbers. We have nothing to do with this.
I see.
Right.
Okay. So you don't know.
Okay.
So to go back, you don't know what the real fiscal deficit is.
First, come clean with that.
Yeah.
Then take a call on how much of a fiscal stimulus you need. Let the fiscal deficit slip.
Right.
Number three, please don't focus on large schemes, because large schemes take a long time to prepare for, and the money actually goes into the system after a long lag. So if you have like a major project, it can take 2-3 years before money is actually put into the construction. That's the preparatory phase. Put the money into existing schemes where all the approvals are in place, just upscale them, put them in the sort of expenditures which are localized,
right?
So that the money doesn't go from the government into a bank in Bombay. Make it localized so it starts generating local economic activity. These are little things that you have to look at.
That's number three.
That's number three. Number four is, as far as the fiscal deficit is concerned, once we have, as I said, recognized the true deficit, recognized how much additional slippage we are willing to incur, please work on a fiscal game plan to bring that deficit back over time. It doesn't have to be done this year or next year. So have a 3-year, 5-year roadmap in bringing the deficit back under control.
You've said that corporate tax rates, which this government did 6 months or so ago, haven't really worked.
They will not work in this circumstance.
Why not?
For the very simple reason.
Because if industrialists get tax cuts,
so
then hopefully they will put more money
into what? They will put
into their businesses.
Why should
and
they put it into
people.
the business? Why would they put it in the business?
Because that's what they should
No. So
do.
what has happened to this money? Remember, you're giving this money not as an incentive to invest. It was done in the middle of the year,
right?
Which means that no new investments are going to happen. So you've given the industrialists a windfall in the current year.
But that's
the intention, what you're talking about, could have been done just as effectively by saying that I shall announce a tax cut in the next budget.
Right.
Right. But what you've given up is 1 year's worth of corporate tax money.
But I think
for what joy?
Because the industrialists were cribbing, they were saying...
The industrialists are cribbing, the farmers have been cribbing. What have we done for them?
No, the government is a pro-farm government. They are doing...
What?
Well, they're promising a lot of things at least.
Yeah, but what has happened? The point is,
so
if you're going to give away 60, 70,000 crores to a bunch of industrialists who are very few and they're not going to spend it, rather than give a similar amount to the farmers, PM Kisan is underfunded, money is not being released. Okay. PM Kisan is the only thing which comes even close to what the tax cut has done for the industrialists.
So you would rather give money to PM Kisan Yojana rather than to the corporate?
Much more. At the moment, I have nothing against corporate tax cut, but corporate tax cut should be a forward-looking incentive. If you invest, you'll get it. If you don't invest, no.
What about personal tax cuts? I mean, I'm sure if people like you and me in India versus Bharat, because Bharat you're giving via PM Kisan, etc.
You are not. That's the point.
No, you should. Yeah. But suppose you do that. Your next step is personal tax cuts. Would you recommend that?
At the moment, no.
Why not?
Again, for the same reason that the income tax, personal income tax paying people in the country, tend to save a fairly large percentage of their incomes. So the bang for the buck that you're getting, you're giving up a certain amount of money and it's coming to you and me, a large chunk gets saved. It does not go into generating fresh new economic activity.
Okay.
Whereas if you give it in PM Kisan,
right,
or you give it under NREGS, that money is almost instantly spent.
Right. So
and then it gives rise to the chain that I was talking about.
Sure. Dr. Sen, just last couple of questions. When demonetisation happened in November 2016, Dr. Manmohan Singh said that this will shave between 1 and 2% of the country's GDP. Do you agree with that?
Possibly more.
More than 2%?
Yes. Because as I said, as far as what has happened in informal India, we haven't measured it. Remember, it's done every 5 years.
And have you started measuring it?
Yes, we have started measuring it. It's in process.
When did you start?
This year. It's ongoing. Now, that's going to give you some indication. But we're still that data is going to be not immediately after the demonetization, it's well after. But it will give you some indication. At the moment, the data that you're seeing are estimates made of what's happened to the informal sector. There's no hard data. So you're using corporate proxies to estimate that. And as I said, corporate India was doing quite well until this year.
So the picture is far worse, do you think?
I think it's grimmer than what the numbers actually make out. But again, unless we have some sense of what's happening to Bharat, which we don't have simply because our data systems don't permit it, which is one of the reasons this committee is there. We're trying to convert a lot of these kinds of information about the informal sector into annual, so that we know immediately what's going on.
And you're willing to give the bad news to the government, to the Prime Minister?
Not willing to. That's our job. Whether the government chooses to accept it or not is their lookout.
Dr. Sen, thank you so much for speaking to ThePrint. This is Jyoti Malhotra for ThePrint. Please continue to watch our YouTube channel. It's live and buzzing.